Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome a remarkable guest, Scott Fulton. Scott is the president of Home Ideations and the president of the National Aging in Place Council. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, Lance, great to be with you. It's been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Yes, absolutely. So, Scott, I want to kind of start with a little background here. I introduced you as the president of the National Aging in Place Council. And for viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with what that is, why don't you explain to them what the National Aging in Place Council is and what's some of the work that you guys do?
Sure. It's a group of professionals across the U.S., so it's a national organization. We have chapters across the country. And really what they are professionals in all of the aspects of aging to essentially allow both, particularly the smaller companies and independent workers, to be able to come together and work as teams. Because as you know, in your work, right, there's not a lot like that one person can do. They quickly need to start to reach in and get some help from other disciplines. And so it's really a group of professionals from across 62 different disciplines that all come together and kind of say, well, I've got a client who I know is going to need these 5 things. They need 2 of them right now, and then they're going to need 3 more. And so it naturally starts to put teams together. And so from the consumer side or the client side, it means they're not having to go through, search the yellow pages, however they're going through to try to find, oh, now I'm told I need somebody to work on my front walk. And now I need somebody to help with getting with transportation, those sort of things. So it really kind of tries to make it much more effective for both the consumer and for the professional. So it's really, we just help professionals. We give them ways to work together naturally.
Wonderful. And if somebody's listening or watching this and they're in the senior care or healthcare industry in some fashion, what do you look for when you accept new members? Are there a process that they go through, or is it just you pay a fee and you're a member?
Yeah, no, you don't. You don't just get to send a check. And it's also, while there's a lot of networking communities out there, that's not what we're about. We are truly about professionals who want to find ways to work together effectively. So we go through essentially a criminal check on people, for example, to find out what is your history. That's kind of step one, to make sure that there's nothing obvious there. And that's, again, as a consumer, that's hard to find out. So we take care of that for them. And then the other is to get an understanding of what is the work you do. Is it truly around helping seniors to age in place? And when we say aging in place, that's not simply at home. We have lots of people we work with are in communities, residences. It's just a question, wherever your place is where you are. Right. And so it's an exercise of trying to just vet them. And generally it becomes really obvious to people when they realize, for the professionals to say, wow, this is a whole lot easier than having to be part of a company and all of, because that's really what we're trying to simulate for people, like to be part of a big company without all of the bureaucracy and red tape and cost that goes with it.
That's wonderful. So being in the, aging sector and the senior care industry, I like to find out from our guests kind of what their perspectives are. And would you say you're more optimistic or pessimistic about the future of aging in America as it stands today?
Well, I can wear that, I guess, 2 hats on that one. I maybe just to kind of back it up for your audiences, I teach about health and longevity to adults, and I'm a researcher. So that's really how I started into this, was really to start to look into the data to say what is going on in America with aging, beyond what we all see in the headlines.
Right.
And so the answer is it's both optimistic and pessimistic. So for those who are thinking things are just going to naturally happen for them and it'll all work out, I'm pretty pessimistic. We already know the difficulties that people are getting into, and we talk about in aging, right, the silver tsunami, and I was writing about this in a book I'm working on right now, and I said, when I stop and think about it, tsunami comes in a matter of a day or so, it's over, and then there's the cleanup. This isn't like that. This is going to keep coming because there are about 8 different waves that are all coming at us. So for those people who just want to sit back and wait, like I just, and all of us in aging, right, we say, be more proactive, get engaged. And so for those who are proactive and want to get engaged and want to really learn what's going on, I'm super optimistic because there's great opportunities for people to I think, probably see aging as I do as an opportunity, filled with opportunity. But like every opportunity, you got to go after it. It's not going to come and knock on your door. And so we could look at, I guess I'll kind of put it out there as the phrase that I'm sure you've heard and we all have is we're all getting older, right? Or we're all living longer. So I'll tell you, the data guy, that is not true in America. We are back to, even before COVID, I was talking about, so here's I always say there's always silver linings in everything. So we could say in the pandemic, while as difficult as that was, I'm a pretty optimistic guy. And I'm really seeing the silver linings now. So I was talking about life expectancy and mortality to my students, long before the pandemic, and they all kind of cringe. Oh, don't talk about that. And now it's like they lean in when I start to talk about it because we've got through that discomfort or the uncomfortable phase of talking about it, which is one of the good things. So now it means we can have real conversations and engage in. So what can I do for myself to make sure that I'm going to be more resilient? And doesn't mean I'm never going to get the flu or I'm not going to get anything. Like the life is going to come at us when we least expect it and when we're least prepared. But we're really going to have a lot better opportunity to rebound from it. And so part of going back to the research, I started to do I just kind of, as a researcher, sometimes you just fall into data and you just go down a rabbit hole. Well, I fell into some data that came out of the census, which I didn't realize. The census looks at life expectancies for every electoral district. So that means it has micro communities that are nominally about 3,000 to 4,000 in each district. And so I went through, and there are 69 communities within the U.S. that have life expectancies of over 90.
Wow.
Right? The current life expectancy of the U.S. is around 76 point something, depending on the day you ask me.
Yeah, well, it just regressed for the first time in however many years, too, correct?
Yeah, so so I'll give you a bit of history here again, just to kind of calibrate people around what you hear in the headlines. Is you've got to question that more all the time. So if we take 1960, for example, we were about 13th in the world for life expectancy. We'd already been slipping by then. So by 2010, we were already dangerously close to getting into that, just barely hanging into the top 50, because in 2010 we plateaued from 2010 to 2020 or 2019, and then the pandemic came. We slipped back to 1996 life expectancy. Now we will rebound, right? That's kind of a dip in the curve, and that will come back to what it was pre-pandemic. But we're no longer even in the top 50 in the world, right? There's all kinds of countries that are ahead of us. But again, the optimist says, if they can do it, why can't you and I? So they don't have any special silver bullets in wherever they live or in these 69 communities. So that's where I say there is tremendous opportunity for people who really want to lean in and understand what's going on around longevity and not what's in the headlines. So yeah, it's an interesting time. it is a really interesting, this polarization we see in so many areas. Life expectancy is no exception from it. We see those who should have lived much longer lives that just didn't know any different, and those who are kind of leaning in and say, wow, how did you smoke until 50? Like my dad was like that. He smoked until he was in 55 or so. He lived to 90, right? Yeah. So there is this opportunity, if you kind of catch the right wave early enough, you can get a great ride in retirement.
Real quick before we move on, Scott, I just want to dig in a little bit more on the life expectancy. When you say, America is not in the top 50, what do you attribute that to in your research, or what does the analysis say to you? I know there's probably several factors, people's lifestyle choices, et cetera, but we have some of the best access to healthcare in the world. Why would we be so low on the life expectancy ratings?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's one that I think is one definitely worth going into. So there are I'll get to the lifestyle things because I think those are things we can do. But in terms of from a backdrop to this, if we look at what we've embraced in Western culture, it has been one of building isolation. And so quite innocently, we went back, started in the 50s, we started to develop the subdivisions. And they were the great thing, right? Because I didn't have to live with my parents anymore like we used to. I got to have my own house, and that was great. And I was in that model as well. But of course, when you start to scale things, right? I've worked in big corporations, and it's all about scale. That's where you find out where things work and where they break. And so what's happened as a result of that is we've slowly isolated people. And so now you're in a community or that you're very familiar with your neighbors, you're very familiar with where everything is, except you start to find the transportation now becomes an issue, right? For those with driving kind of challenges, for example, or just everything gets further away instead of closer. And so that's only one part of it. But the other is we just physically have isolated ourselves. We got used to being more isolated and more what we call independent. And so as we study longevity, what we understand, it's not independence, it's interdependence.
Right.
It's kind of that networking element that really provides people the emotional strength, because life is tough some days. You need people around you to support you. And also the logistical support of, I can take you to wherever I'm going shopping. You want to come with me? You don't even have to ask when you're part of a tight community. So we've kind of broken those slowly over time. And I think we're really just starting to see the effects of that. Mm-hmm. There's an element for sure. We have been, in our capitalist approach, which, is great from a business standpoint, but we've kind of lost sight of anything that might be kind of threatening the health of our communities in ways that we didn't anticipate. So we're seeing a lot of what I call the middle class, who are really, if you're in the, we'll call the lower half of the middle class, mm-hmm. Those are the ones that most at risk because they don't have access to any federal funding programs, and they honestly do not have enough money for retirement in anything that looks like they're hoping for. So so that shows up in life expectancy of the elements that, and I'll kind of get into to the lifestyle elements here. Everyone hears about diet and exercise, right? How long have you been hearing about diet and exercise?
As long as I can remember.
As long as you can, right back in school. That's what they taught us. So they're obvious things to us. The diet in particular has been fraught with tremendous confusion. Like the simple, like, are eggs good or bad for you?
Depends on what year it is.
Exactly. So there's a great video I've watched, and I share it with my class all the time. It's just comical. It takes them through the kind of the guy from the future and don't eat no, it's okay. No, it's okay. It's back and forth, and that's what we lived through. So we've become, I think, really kind of immune to it. We just stopped listening anymore because we don't know what to believe.
Right.
So what I would say on that, we don't need to get into it all for sure today, but we know far more now. Finally, we've figured out, cholesterol, where does it actually come from? Well, 15% of it only comes from the food that we eat. the rest of it's largely, I mean, the rest of it comes from the liver, but the elements that go into how much cholesterol we make is something different to manage in a different way. That's not simply, and that's not a green light to go eat, crap food. That's a, processed food. Just on the diet piece, I would say the simple answer on the food piece for people that they've, again, lost sight of is we eat way, way too much processed food and way too much sugar. Mm-hmm. If just those two things, we started eating more whole food. And then the other one I'd add is that we eat way too much bread. And the problem really with the bread isn't the bread per se, it's the wheat flour. When we say whole grains, we eat way, way, way too much wheat. Yeah. If we ate that in other whole grains, the more the legacy grains, the whole issue of, for a lot of people, the gluten sensitivity, a lot of these things would just disappear. So all these things start to weigh down. But the other three elements of lifestyle are really the mind, the environment, and the community. And so the mind
just to jump in and to differentiate a lot of these, we'll say some of the third world countries that have longer life expectancy, they don't have all the processed foods. They don't have all these things that we can consume here very readily and easily accessible. Is that where it really starts to differentiate?
So it's part of, right? And so what I'll always kind of tell people, nothing in health is binary. Right. So as soon as we hear ourselves saying those sort of things, and I do it too, is like, I've got to stop myself. And it is never, ever going to be one thing. And that's sure. Why there's really 5 elements. So the 5 elements are mind, environment, diet, activity, and community. I describe, so as an analogy you could use is, I grew up on a rowing course. And so if a 4-person rowboat with a coxswain, and so the coxswain kind of drives the ship or drives the boat and points them. So it's like the mind, right? It kind of sets your attitude and goal and focus of where you're going. And then the other 4 are really the environment, activity, diet, and community. They all have equal work to do. And if one falls down, the whole, you can't keep the boat on course. And so it's really, that's these other elements that have started to impinge in on. So if we look at those communities you talk about, the whole aspect of community is so much stronger. It goes to what I was talking to earlier, right? So that's kind of broken down. They naturally do more gardening. We moved to our new home, and I'm just amazed by neighbors who have their own gardens. I got a fridge full of figs. We got way more figs, right? They all come at once than we can eat. Would you like some figs? So it's the whole food, kind of homegrown. Not that that's practical or reasonable for people, but the other would be, I think, the community piece is really important, which we've talked about. And the other one, which we can get into as well, is the environment piece. And the environment is really 2 sides to it. The internal environment being our home, where we spend most of our time. And then the external environment, both the good and the bad, both, the benefits of getting outdoors every day for at least an hour, but also the 350 million chemicals that are out in the outside environment today that we have. I used to work for one of the big chemical companies, and we just don't know what those risks are on their own long-term, even at low doses, let alone start to figure out how they work together. So it's that element of so these other people don't have that kind of exposure. Right. But as they get more westernized, we do see their life expectancy start to decay in some cases. But so it's not simple, but at the same time, if you kind of get back to core principles, it really doesn't have to be that complicated. So, as I say, every country in terms of developed country in the world has continued to make progress on life expectancy with the exception of one, U.S.
It's incredible. I mean, that is just, I believe it, but it's, you tell the average person, they would find it so hard to believe.
Yeah. Because we keep getting hit with this headline, and people say, during the pandemic, there was somebody at the CDC who made the comment of we're all living longer. And I thought of all they were the ones responsible for holding the data.
If anybody should know, it should be them. Yeah.
Right. Because these aren't the things that they look at. And, whether that's right or wrong, it's reality. And so there's no point getting upset other than be realistic and don't be surprised. Right. So like, I'm sure in your clients, like one of the biggest things you see all the time is how surprised people are. I didn't realize something was going to happen. Right.
Right. Well, I had also introduced you as the president of your company, Home Ideations, which really focuses around senior living, adaptability, things like that. And I'll let you explain further. But with all of these things that we're discussing, what changes are you seeing coming to senior living? Because I know in our area, we help families that are in assisted living, independent living, even in the nursing homes and hospitals. Families will still have our services because they want their loved one to get the best care possible, to get the attention that they need. And primarily, most of the services are in their private home because people want to safely age in place in their home for as long as possible. But you see every other corner, literally in our area, there are new senior living complexes being built from the ground up to help supplement this issue here, quote unquote, of living longer. They need places to live. What changes are you seeing coming into senior living?
Yeah. So maybe just to kind of circle back, just to clarify one of the things you mentioned around,
Please.
Right. So there's this element of there are more of us living longer because the boomers are getting old, right? Which shouldn't be confused with we're living longer. Those are, they sound the same sometimes, and just for your listeners. So within the senior living communities, I'm not seeing a lot of changes yet coming. It generally caters to the top 1%. Those are the ones that are, if you are interested in it, those are generally who they're building for because they want all the extras, and they can, and you can make money much more easily. You don't have to be too clever to make money. You can put a lot of money into it. But to give you a gauge on a per unit basis, if you look at, say, a lifetime community, those are going to be around 1.5 million per unit going in, right? So if you're putting in a 300 unit building, it's a big project.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money on the line. Need to make money.
Right.
No one wants to. If you build it, they will come at that kind of dollar. That's so that's the business reality where they are. What I am seeing coming, which is I think really will be the big community solution that doesn't really exist today. There are kind of homegrown versions of it that I think we're learning from, but it'll generally look, I think, more like a hybrid of the community type kind of brick and mortar all on one site to saying, okay, we all live in this quadrant of the city. What can we do within our, a reasonable geographic area? You could say, if I drew a 1 mile radius around where, some central point, and everybody in that radius can be part of a community for a really modest fee, and we can start to leverage services. So if we look at, for example, every business service that services seniors, the more that they can bring people together, the lower the cost they can deliver. So if your staff has to spend an hour between visits driving, right, somebody's got to cover that hour cost. It gets built in. Versus if it's 4 homes on the same street that they can stop one after the next, the cost to you to be able to do that is going to be less. And so it's that sort of a model, but it will take a systems kind of networking approach to essentially make it look and feel a lot like the services are being provided within a kind of the brick and mortar communities that we see. But in reality, it's still people living in their homes. And I think we'll see some different homes starting to happen out of existing homes. I don't mean necessarily new homes. We can talk about that separately, but ways of getting back to multi-generational housing. We're seeing it happening already. There are many drivers. It's not simply an age-related driver, which is good, but they're economic drivers, which ultimately make that more efficient. And so we start to see some models of network systems provided, different age groups. And that's, I think, the biggest opportunity for it is as soon as you go into a senior living community, it's essentially, those over 75 nominally, not all, but, and then the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's an unnatural, it's not a natural state for people to be in. They can get great care for sure, but it's unnatural. So the piece on that is really the networking. And so many of these are homegrown today. The problem is they get started by people in a community who have a lot of enthusiasm, and they've been doing it for 10 years and they're kind of burned out.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Who's going to pick that up and carry? And I think that's where they typically fall. But there was one company I was looking at in Athens, Georgia, who is essentially providing it all from an office space. Mm-hmm. You can live in an apartment anywhere. And the idea is, same way you would call down to the superintendent or whoever at the front desk, you'd make a call, and later that day, someone shows up at your door without having to be in a community. So it'll be those kinds of models that I think once we start to get comfortable with them, we'll start to really take off. But there aren't many there yet, but I certainly see them coming.
Scott, do you perceive senior living communities being on the rise as far as preferential choices for seniors, or on the rise of them choosing and wanting to remain in their home and safely aging in place?
I think I haven't seen a meaningful shift in it. I think the default for most is we want to stay as home as long as we can. It's
like 90+% when given the choice. They want to stay in their own home, but yet you see these communities springing up everywhere and anywhere.
Right. So it's that, so this is the disconnect. It kind of goes to the optimistic, pessimistic conversation, your question you asked. So we'd like the idea to stay in our home as long as we can, but we don't know, or we're not prepared to do what it's going to take to stay at home as long as we can. And so because we're unsure, and we call it, we describe people as getting stuck. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's easy to get stuck because you start to look at, there's so many questions. I get overwhelmed. So there's that piece of it. And the other is, for couples get stuck. And this is one where I get called in. I feel like I'm a marriage counselor sometimes, is, he wants to go to the resort community living. It's got the golf course and, it's got the country club feel to it. And, and I'm not moving. They're going to take me out of here feet first.
Yeah.
That is really common. Which partner it is, it doesn't matter. And so the couple gets stuck. And so that's unfortunate, because now it's we're going to wait to see who dies first.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help anybody either. And so that's where I find I've spent not most, but certainly significant time when I work with clients in terms of homeowners. I spend more time on that, partly because if you can't solve that, you're not going to move anything forward. And what always happens is as soon as you have someone who knows more options are out there than what either of you know about, that's helpful.
Right.
And it's also someone who's not listening to try to defend a position. Right? I go in trying to say, or to talk to people, say, well, what is it that you want? Right? What if you kind of, let's dig into that. And what is it that he or she wants? And we kind of get into that. And as I start to listen, it sounds like it's kind of the classic, right? They want more things the same than they realize. They're focused on the few little things that are different.
Right.
So if I'll say the golf course, maybe that was the thing. Well, how often do you golf? Well, I don't golf much, but when I do, so maybe there's another solution that you don't have to go live at a golf course. Right? There's all sorts of examples.
And I think for us, because we encounter this quite often, especially during the pandemic, families didn't know about this whole industry of home care. They didn't even know that was a thing. And several families pulled their loved ones out because they didn't want to continue. We're in Michigan. We get some pretty brutal winters. They didn't want to have to visit their mom or their dad or their spouse through the window from the outside, and there wasn't a medical reason that they had to specifically be in a nursing home. They didn't require, 24-hour RN access and clinical care. But then the other side of that coin is families who venture to move their loved ones or themselves into a senior community because they're not able to care for themselves at home. They don't know that there's things like home ideations and all these modifications and these services that can come there, and you can continue living comfortably and safely in your home if that is what you desire to do. And a lot of them, I think, make that decision for the community living rather than staying at home because they're not informed to know that it is possible to continue living at home as well.
Right. And they've, I think, classically left it too late.
Yeah.
Right. If you,
it's too far, yeah.
Right. The classic one is, mom went into the, we get the call, mom went into the hospital with a broken hip and she can't come home until there's a way, until the home is made accessible. And then, so that's now weeks to get the home accessible potentially because, by the time you get, well, who can do it? And you go through it and you just say, I guess this was the signal that we needed to, we should have done it. We knew, but I guess we have to go. That's why that time of keeping your options open as long as you can, that takes work.
Right.
Otherwise,
and
be prepared.
A lot of planning.
Yeah.
And foresight. Yeah.
It's a, and I always kind of, I criticize my colleagues because we kind of say, or there's a common thing of, well, people need to plan more. Yeah, that's true, but we need to help them know what to plan, how to plan. Just telling people they should have planned more isn't helpful to anybody.
Exactly.
Right. So these would be the things, like I kind of say, look around the home and say, what are the things you do today? Imagine, I don't know, you could say anything that you had to. Well, here's a classic one, the mixer right in the kitchen. So I've had this with clients. And well, who gets the mixer out? Well, we do it once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks because I like to make cookies when the grandchildren come over. Well, who gets the mixer out from under the cupboard underneath? Well, he does. And so how do you find that? Yeah, it's pretty challenging. I said, and how long would you like to continue to do that?
Right. Yes.
Do you know there's a way that kind of fingertip, you could have that 40-pound whatever mixer come out and kind of have you risk, hurting your back doing it.
Right.
I didn't know. Well, I'd kind of seen them. There are so many little things that if you just imagine it weighed 2 or 3 times as much, right? Our reach is going to get a little shorter over time.
Balance,
so if
everything.
Yeah. If I'm already kind of just walk around, I spent, I grew up in manufacturing, like both small, our own company, but also like automotive. And I think Amazon is the example. If you look at how things flow and how things move, my eye sees them very easily, but I recognize others don't. But it's that element of, so if I could only do 2 or 3 steps, because that's only practical because something's heavy or whatever, and you start to realize all the places that start to break down in that model, say, well, yeah, there's lots of ways we could do it differently. But we need time to plan those out to get comfortable with the solutions. And so the whole idea of planning more, I think, is engaging some experts, getting some third opinions that actually know what they're doing to give you multiple options and give you time to make really good choices that save you money. Because the later you leave it, the price tag only goes up because you don't have time to shop the market.
Well, and you might make a decision you regret later because you did it under pressure. This is going to be a perfect segue, Scott, to my next question for you. But before that, I like to equate it to when you find out you're expecting your first child or second child or third child. You don't wait to get the nursery ready and get the crib put together after the baby's born. You get that all ready before the baby's born.
Exactly. That's the example I use all the time, right?
Yeah.
And how long is that child in the nursery?
Not long enough.
Right. Versus how long are we going to live in our homes?
Right.
To be able to leverage it, it'll be 10 times longer easily. Yeah. And we put a 10th the effort into it because it kind of goes back to that mind piece because our attitude is about, well, I'm going to deny, I don't want to think about these things. Well, as soon as I can start to see it as opportunity, right? And I'm going to, in the course of that, I'm also going to do things that will help preserve my health, right? That's how we keep doing things longer. It's really not about, the money piece. If we understand the money piece, So what's it cost per month for senior living communities in Michigan?
It ranges on average from the low end is 35 to 4,000 a month. The high end is 12,500 to 15,000 a month. It just depends on the facility, the amenities, a lot of factors, but it's very expensive.
Yeah. It's and I think people don't, that low number is, if you search the internet, you'll always see some low number.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what I tell them is go visit some communities so you can actually see them and get they'll give you the numbers and say what's included in that and what isn't. And then you're working with real data. So yeah, it's that it goes to the investment, right? Around what's the return on the investment. And so I typically use if I said if I said 50,000, so I need to put 50,000 into a home, I'll say, to make it age proof. Right. So I can for sure do all the things that, there's always little things that you can decide to do or not do, but the basics of access, no matter what, the basics of a bathroom, dealing with, do you need to get to a second floor? How do we get you access to the second floor? Do we put you all on the main floor? Usually you can get that solved for about 50,000. So figure out what that is worth to you if you have to go into a community. So typically that'll be, for a lot of people, it's about a 6-month break even.
Right.
So if it keeps you in your home 6 months longer, you've paid for it. 50,000 is a lot of money. No question.
Right.
But put it in the context of, so what is next? What will be your next plan?
And before I go to this next question, I want to piggyback on that for one more minute, because we have countless families who they will go and transition from their home into assisted living or a senior living community, and they're going in with not a real good understanding or a true understanding of what that will mean for their loved one. And I always say, if you're doing it because you need care, meaning you need a caregiver to help you to the restroom, getting off the couch, helping you, the senior living community is not designed for that. It has some help, it's almost like a concierge service. But if you're needing hands-on care, senior living communities are not the right option, or it will all be extremely expensive a la carte, because we have so many families, Scott, where, they find that out the hard way. They're there a week or two, and then the families, literally, we just had this happen. They'll get a letter saying, well, your mom's probationary period or evaluation period is over, so she's not going to qualify for our assisted living wing of the, campus. We're going to put her in memory care, which memory care is a lot more than the assisted living. And it's a locked unit. It's very institutionalized when you get to that point. Or your option is you release the facility of all responsibility. She can continue living in her little studio apartment, but you have to hire an outside company now to come in, assume all liability and responsibility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now the family, they've already sold mom's home, and the family doesn't have room or the ability to bring mom in to live with them now. So they're stuck in a really hard position. So several families over the years, what they've done, and when they've encountered that, they take mom or dad out and they go get a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment, which, is a fraction of the cost. And then they have services come into the apartment to take care of mom. And again, though, I think it goes back to what we were saying, families, they make a lot of these decisions under pressure, and they get sold sometimes something that they really shouldn't be buying. But they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know the questions to really ask. They think, one family was devastated, and they kept saying, but they said they had 24-hour nursing care. In their head, that meant nursing care with their loved one for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we know that's not the case. There's a registered nurse either on campus or available by phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not with your mother. But I want to just touch on the homes a little bit more, because you don't just talk to talk, Scott, you walk to walk, and you recently just built your own retirement home. So tell us what was special about that, and what that meant for you for kind of planning ahead.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a fun project. We had an opportunity come up. My wife got offered a job with a biotech company in Charlottesville, Virginia, and where we were previously wasn't really where I was ever imagining. It just, I didn't know the area necessarily. I spent most of my years in Canada. So even though I've traveled most of the US, I didn't know that area that well, but it was clear to me it wasn't the ideal place for retirement. And so we came down to Charlottesville and realized, wow, this has got a lot of the things. So it's a university town. So I knew that from living in one in Canada. And so kind of touching back on what you started with or spoke to a minute ago was location, right? In realty, location, location, location. So you can, if you're in the right location, you can build a whole lot of things around that right location. So it's kind of like you said, how do you spend your money around it? And so I looked around here and recognized that I happened to find what sounds crazy, a 5.5 acre lot, literally on the edge of the city boundary. And so while that sounds like a lot, we were able to develop it in a way that essentially has no steps other than, so there are steps on the home. There's one set of stairs that goes from the main floor down to the basement, which we can also access on the outside if we wanted to use the landscape essentially to go around and go down if we had to. The only other steps are to go up to the second floor, and those aren't for us, but if we ever had someone living in our home to take care of us, that's where they would be able to live. So on a very basic strategy was, how do we avoid steps? And that's generally the best. And so we started to develop, because I do this for others, I got to do it for myself. I got to design the whole house with my wife's input all the way through, and lots of good questions. And so we started to incorporate things that are fairly leading edge in some technology, but really the things like, the one I always kind of look to people would be your front steps. So look at a 55 plus community where people go in, and most builders will tell you, we don't really know what's required unless it's a community building that's required by ADA standards to be a certain way. But other than the main floor, master and ensuite, we don't know any different about what's so special about this. We put them all together. Okay, that seems to be what people want. And then you go in and they have all these steps to get into. I think it was one I toured. I went to give a talk there, and I think something like 80% of them all had 3 or more steps to get up into the house. Well, so how do your neighbors who are all over 55 come and visit you? Right? This hasn't quite been thought through. So there's ways to, generally we landscape the front as a way to get around steps. And now if it's landscaped well, it looks really good. So we did that with ours. So you can get up to the front door, and I put some videos in, and maybe we'll be able to overlay on this. You just push on the door handle, and it's so like a commercial door handle. You just push on it and the door swings open.
Wow.
The same. So while we know levers are better than knobs, this is better yet, because we'll come in with two handfuls of groceries, and I can just lean with my elbow and open the door. So all of our door handles in the house are like that. All you do is pull on them or push on them. So you can pull with a finger. So people who, for example, have arthritis, this is so much easier than anything else. We did things now, again, because it's a new house, we made all of our doorways wider, which is one of the silliest things that builders do, to put small doorways in, because an extra door costs $5 when you're building the house. It is just ridiculous. And in your business, part of the challenge is, how do you get in there to help somebody if they need, with toileting or bathroom activities, right? So shower, for example, would be a great example. So all I've ever designed for clients are curbless or roll-in or walk-in showers, whatever you want to call them. And we intentionally did one that wasn't oversized. A lot of my clients, would have big homes, and they say, well, we just need to fill the space. They want to take out the big Roman tub, but we'll just put a garden tub in there to cover it. We'll put in a nice big shower, which is great. It doesn't have to be that big. I tell people it has to be big enough for 2 people. So if you're 30 and I'm telling you I'm building you a shower for 2 people, hey, party time is what they say. And of course, we look at it and say, so I know that I'll be able to get staff in there and they'll be able to work safely, and that's good for everybody. So they'll be able to do the job that they were hired to come in and do. Little things in a shower too, like, so you want an overhead, whether it's a rain shower or whatever off the wall, but you also want to hand spray on a rod. And so again, This gets you, so it's a separate handspray on a rod, allows you to adjust the height. My wife will go in and use that, so just not have to get her hair wet. So she can shower, not have to deal with that. I used it yesterday to wash the dog, who was definitely in need, and it's never been easier to wash the dog than in a shower like that. So in terms of those sort of things, again, it comes down to how do you make things just flow with the minimum effort. And the idea of effort is use it in your exercise space. And we can talk about that separate from an activity standpoint. But stairways are not the place to be getting exercise, because as we deal with upwards of 24 medications, getting up in the night and having to deal with stairs because something is just asking for trouble. So, sorry, you were going to interrupt.
I was just going to ask, when somebody's watching or listening to this and they're thinking, my gosh, this sounds wonderful, but I don't see how I could afford to do this, and it's got to be really expensive. What are some tips you could provide viewers and listeners on just simple things that they could do that might not even cost anything, but it could make their lives easier and safer to age in place?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's one that people really struggle with. And really probably the first guidance I give to people is start having some real conversations, conversations about life and not about stuff, right? When we think about, well, who's going to get the house and who's going to get the whatever paintings and whatever it might be. Yeah, that stuff that's all part of wills and things. But I really try to encourage people to start thinking about what would you like the rest of your life to look like as opportunities. Because in that conversation, you start to invite other people into your journey. So for kids, right, we always struggle with, well, I'm not sure what my parents would want because we never really talked about that.
Right.
And so those are things, and kids are in a really, really difficult spot. They're at a different point in their life. They've never had to make decisions for their parents' well-being, so that's really difficult for them. And they're really trying to figure, well, what would they want? Because when I look at what I want at 50, isn't necessarily what I will want at 75 or 85. And so their parents are there. And that's why we have these disconnect right throughout life in terms of different values. So first, I kind of encourage people is just start to have some real conversations about the journey of life in a positive way. It'll seem uncomfortable, but everything as I teach, you don't start to learn until you start to feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
And that's a signal that you're ready to learn. Because you're now in a conversation. It allows families and friends to come together in ways that we typically haven't done. And kind of that bridging the isolation piece of how do we start to pull people back together to be part of each other's life. And I always kind of view that, I always said that people are smart. They will figure this stuff out. The problem we have today is they figured out too late.
Right.
So how do we help them figure these things out? Because everybody's solution is unique, as it should be. I can't come in and tell them what they should do. Only they know. All I can do is help ask questions and help conversations to get them to make those decisions, the ones that they want. So that to me that costs nothing but some time and investing. And I think there's some good things. And you'll naturally start to come out, I think, with some things that will make sense. And then the other maybe practical one is get organized with your stuff.
Right.
We've all seen this. Like some of my most eager students are the ones who inherited their parents' junk that just kind of left them with it to clean up. And I said, I would never do that to my kids.
Yeah.
And
I've heard that story a few times.
Right. So there's kind of the two things I think are great places to start, because that's for a lot of people. I just don't know where to start. And those are two good places to start. And a lot of things will start to come in line.
And I think the first step is always the hardest.
Yeah.
Once you take that first step, you can at least start finding your way through it. But here, before we wrap up, just a couple more questions real briefly. You just launched a podcast with Catherine Owens called Tattered Capes. I recommend everybody go give it a listen and subscribe. But do you want to briefly share what Tattered Capes is about?
Yeah, it's it kind of came out with, so Catherine, oddly enough, is from the senior living community world, right? And so in my world, she's the competition. That's kind of how we're viewed. And so but as we started, so Catherine and I met over about a year ago, I guess, and we just started to talk through different issues and what was, she's pretty unique in that world. And she really kind of said, to your question, like, so the nursing thing, like, don't ask the question, like, because people are trained to check that off the box. She said, no, tell me what that is, right?
Right.
So, right, what is the value? Let me understand what that is. And so what we realized was we had this unique pairing of coming from different worlds and different solutions. And how do you help people understand the choices? And how do you have conversations around lots of these issues from people who come from different perspectives, who don't agree on everything? And that's the beauty of it. That's why we get to have a little bit of fun with it. And it's just it's been a really positive thing. We'll launch it later in September. It's just in its final stages to get ready. But
wonderful.
It's I think everything, it kind of goes back to how do we help people get unstuck? If there's a common theme, right, in everywhere, it's I'm stuck because I don't know what to do. Having a hard time making a decision. Is anything we can do to help people get unstuck starts to free them up and changes the attitude, and everything just starts to fall in line much better.
No, I like that, Scott, and we'll have to have the two of you back on the show to talk about your show once it gets launched and you guys get rolling, so we can share it with our viewers and listeners. And last question for you today, and again, I just so appreciate this important, vital information that families just don't know about and they're not aware of, or at least it's not on the in front of mind for them when they're talking at family dinner with their loved ones or even themselves. And I think, like you said, it's a conversation you want to start sooner rather than later. We're going to have the links to your company, Home Ideations, here up on the screen and in the show notes, as well as the link to the National Aging in Place Council. Both are all doing tremendous work, as well as your membership to the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. But I want to ask you, Scott Fulton, when we talk to you again, and we're friends now, and we'll talk before this, but if we were to talk 5 years from now, what is Scott Fulton doing?
So I'm not your typical retiree, because I've never, even from my 20s, never had a dream of retirement that just didn't register for me for whatever reason. So I seem to have more things going on. So I'm on some boards. I recently got invited to a biotech startup out of California. I'm on the board for that. Again, it's associated around helping people age better. And I got invited on I'm chair of a housing committee here in Charlottesville when they found I was in town. I love really the collaboration. That to me is like anything that's really involves really creating opportunities around the senior space, whether it's housing, public health. Those are really the things that continue to get me excited. I feel like I worked my first 6 years to prepare for my most important work. And so I think all that's still ahead of me. I'm not one to say no. I encourage people to start to say yes to some things that they've been fearful of saying no to, and learn to say no to some things that they know they should have been saying no to before. And so, yeah, it'll just be I think continuing to learn and understand. And what I would hope, if we talk again in 5 years, we put that on our calendars, will be what has changed, right? Because I will tell you that it's been a lot of years of pessimism, but I will tell you there's been no time like this year where I've seen a shift in attitude and a shift in thinking. And so around a few areas. And so I'm absolutely optimistic that we're going to start to see some real progress happen. And I think people are going to feel more empowered to realize once they know their options, now I can come up with some better solutions, but I know I need to do something. And so that's to be part of that in people's lives, I think is just a great opportunity, as the kind of work you do, right? It's just, you make such a difference. And so your listeners don't get a chance to say thank you, but I'll certainly say thanks, because I know from the families that you work with, it's just, it's invaluable work.
Yeah. And it all works together. And, we believe in, a high tide should raise all boats, not just one. And anytime we can help get important information and resources out, like the work you're doing, we're happy to do so. And I just want to say thank you for doing what you're doing and raising these important issues for these topics that sometimes families don't want to talk about them, or they're not even thinking about talking about them. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time today. And we look forward to having you back on again in the future.
That's great. Lance, thanks for doing this, and thanks for having me over. It's been great to talk to you.
Our pleasure, Scott. Thank you so much.
Okay, keep well.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Scott Fulton for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.